Commander Vex-Thul adjusted his sensory appendages and let out what could only be described as the galactic equivalent of an exasperated sigh. The holographic display before him showed the third planet of the Sol system, spinning lazily like a blue-green marble that someone had carelessly tossed into space. So, he chittered to his second-in-command, Science Officer Culinary, these are the beings that destroyed Battle Group 7? Quinlar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a nervous tic that had developed over the past 3 cycles. Affirmative, Commander. The species calls themselves humans. Humans. Vex-Thul rolled the word around his vocal chambers like a bad piece of fermented algae. And they accomplished this feat with, what exactly? Antimatter cannons? Quantum disruptors? Reality-bending psionics? Well, sir. Quinlar's membrane fluttered uncomfortably. They used kinetic projectiles. The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Somewhere in the distance, a maintenance drone dropped a wrench. Kinetic projectiles, Vex-Thul repeated slowly, as if speaking to a particularly dim larva. You mean they threw rocks at our most advanced fleet? Not exactly rocks, sir. More like refined metal cylinders. Propelled by controlled chemical explosions. Vex-Thul's mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among his species. Oh, how delightfully primitive. What's next? Are you going to tell me they still use wheels for transportation? Actually, sir, that was rhetorical, Culinary. The science officer's antennae drooped. Yes, sir. But they do still use wheels. The commander's laugh died in his throat like a strangled space gull. He turned his full attention to the tactical displays, studying the after-action reports from Battle Group 7. What he saw there made his stomach sacks churn with something between disbelief and grudging respect. The humans had done something no species in recorded galactic history had ever attempted. When faced with a technologically superior force, instead of surrendering or attempting negotiation, they had gotten creative. Walk me through this again, Vex-Thul commanded, settling into his command pod. And this time, spare no detail, no matter how ridiculous it sounds. Culinary activated the holographic replay, and the bridge was suddenly filled with the ghostly blue images of Battle Group 7's final moments. The engagement began at 0800 Standard Galactic Time. Admiral Zorketha's flagship, the Inevitability, dropped out of hyperspace along with 12 destroyer-class vessels and 47 fighter craft. The display showed the massive hegemony fleet materializing in Earth's orbital space like metallic predators descending on their prey. Vex-Thul had to admit it was an impressive sight. The Inevitability alone was 3 kilometers long, bristling with enough firepower to crack a moon. Standard intimidation protocol, Vex-Thul murmured approvingly. Show overwhelming force, demand surrender, collect tribute. Efficient. That's where things began to deviate from projections, sir. The human response had been immediate. Not the expected transmission of surrender, but something that had sent the hegemony's translation computers into fits of confusion. What exactly did they say? Vex-Thul asked, though he suspected he already knew from the reports. Quinlar's membrane rippled with what might have been embarrassment. The exact translation was, "Hold my beer and watch this." "Hold my beer," Vex-Thul repeated flatly. It appears to be some sort of ritual phrase indicating the imminent performance of an act of questionable wisdom, sir. The holographic display showed what happened next, and Vex-Thul found himself leaning forward despite his better judgment. The humans had launched nothing at the hegemony fleet. No missiles, no energy weapons, no exotic particles. Instead, they had started talking, but not to the hegemony. They ignored us completely, Culinary continued, his voice taking on a tone of bewildered admiration. Instead, they began broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. Music, apparently. Music? Vex-Thul's head tilted at an angle that would have been painful for most carbon-based life forms. Yes, sir. Something called rock and roll. The Psychoanalysis Division believes it was intended to boost morale and coordinate their response. What the humans had done next defied every tactical manual in the hegemony's vast military database. They had taken their civilian orbital stations, their mining platforms, their research facilities, their communication satellites, their weather monitoring equipment, and their garbage disposal units, and turned them into the galaxy's most unlikely weapons. They used momentum, Quinlar explained, highlighting trajectory lines on the display. Each station was equipped with simple chemical thrusters, originally intended for orbital maintenance. The humans coordinated a simultaneous burn, sending everything in a calculated dance around their planet's gravity well. Vex-Thul watched in growing amazement as hundreds of objects began spiraling inward from the outer system. Asteroids that had been slowly mined for decades suddenly sprouted jury-rigged engines. Decommissioned space platforms that should have been floating dead in space roared to life. Even what appeared to be a fast food restaurant somehow joined the orbital ballet. The gravitational mechanics alone. Quinlar whispered. Sir, they turned their entire solar system into a kinetic weapon. Using nothing but basic physics and what our cultural analysts describe as aggressive enthusiasm. The Inevitability and her escort fleet had faced down starkiller weapons, reality-warping technologies, and interdimensional horrors without flinching. But they had never encountered an enemy that threw literally everything they had, including what appeared to be someone's vintage automobile collection, directly at their faces while playing music at volumes that violated several interstellar noise ordinances. The Admiral's final transmission, Quinlar continued quietly, was simply, "What the void are they doing?" Vex-Thul studied the tactical analysis. The humans had achieved something remarkable. Not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through sheer, bloody-minded determination and a complete willingness to ignore conventional military doctrine. Casualties? He asked. Battle Group 7, complete loss. Human casualties, approximately 12, mostly from accidents during the improvised weapon construction. Oh, and one individual who apparently forgot to secure his safety harness while welding rocket engines to a recreational vehicle. The commander's sensory stalks twitched. 12. Yes, sir. They seem to consider this an acceptable exchange rate. Vex-Thul stared at the blue-green planet rotating peacefully below. Somewhere down there, beings who had just annihilated a galactic-class military force were probably going about their daily routines. Working, sleeping, reproducing, and apparently planning their next impossible stunt. Sir? Quinlar ventured carefully. Command is requesting our tactical assessment. Should we proceed with the pacification protocol? Vex-Thul was quiet for a long moment, watching Earth turn. Finally, he activated his command console and began composing a message that would change the course of galactic history. Science officer, he said thoughtfully, what do you know about this human concept called a negotiation? 3 standard cycles later, Commander Vex-Thul found himself in the most surreal situation of his 40-year military career. He was sitting in what the humans called a coffee shop on their orbital station designated New Geneva, trying to make sense of a beverage that was apparently both a stimulant and a social ritual. Across from him sat Captain Elena Torres, the human who had personally coordinated the orbital bombardment that destroyed Battle Group 7. She was stirring her coffee with a small metal implement while explaining her species' approach to interstellar diplomacy. So you see, Torres said cheerfully, completely ignoring the fact that she was addressing a being whose species had conquered half the galaxy, we figured you folks might be reasonable once you realized we weren't going to roll over and play dead. Vex-Thul's translator struggled with the idiom, play dead, eventually settling on, simulate termination for strategic purposes. He decided not to ask for clarification. Captain Torres, he began carefully, my species has studied warfare for millennia. We have tactical databases containing the combat doctrines of over 3,000 civilizations. None of them ever considered weaponizing their garbage disposal systems. Torres grinned, a facial expression that still made Vex-Thul's survival instincts twitch. Well, that's their loss. Jenkins managed to get 17 kills with his modified waste recycler alone. Jenkins? Sanitation engineer. Third shift. Nice guy, terrible at poker. She took a sip of her coffee and studied Vex-Thul with eyes that seemed far too amused for someone discussing military casualties. He's been asking when you folks are coming back. Apparently, he's got some new modifications he wants to test. The commander's sensory stalks drooped. Captain, I must ask. Are all humans as enthusiastic about violence as your species appears to be? Oh, we're not violent, Torres replied, waving her hand dismissively. We're competitive. There's a difference. You destroyed an entire battle fleet. Because you were trying to conquer us. That's unsporting. Vex-Thul's mandibles clicked together in confusion. Unsporting? Sure. You showed up with overwhelming firepower, demanded surrender, and expected us to just give up without a fight. Where's the fun in that? Torres leaned back in her chair, which creaked ominously under the movement. Now, if you'd challenged us to something interesting, like a dance-off or a baking competition, we might have had a proper contest. A baking competition? Jenkins makes a mean apple pie. Could probably take on your best chefs. Vex-Thul tried to process this information through the lens of standard military doctrine and found his cognitive processors grinding to a halt. Captain, are you suggesting that your species would engage in culinary combat rather than conventional warfare? Why not? More fun, fewer casualties, and everybody gets fed afterward. Torres finished her coffee and signaled to a nearby service drone. Speaking of which, how do you folks feel about barbecue? Before Vex-Thul could formulate a response, his communicator chimed with an urgent message from Culinary aboard his flagship. The science officer's image appeared in miniature hologram form, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in what Vex-Thul had learned to recognize as barely controlled panic. Commander, we have a situation. Torres perked up with interest. Ooh, what kind of situation? The fun kind or the boring kind? Quinlar's antennae twitched at the interruption. Ma'am, with respect, I believe your people have just declared war on the Zenthari collective. The Zenthari? Torres frowned. Never heard of them. Are they the ones with the tentacles or the ones with the attitude problem? Both, actually, Vex-Thul replied weakly. They're also the most militaristic species in this sector. They've been trying to provoke a conflict with the hegemony for decades. Well, that's convenient, Torres said brightly. Now they can fight us instead. How did this happen? Quinlar's hologram flickered with what might have been distress. Apparently, their diplomatic envoy made the mistake of insulting your planet's cuisine during a first contact ceremony. Something about how primitive species always produce inedible food. Torres's expression shifted, and Vex-Thul felt a sudden chill run through his exoskeleton. The human's eyes had gone very, very cold. They insulted our food? Yes, ma'am. They specifically mentioned that, quote, no civilized being would consume the revolting organic waste these creatures call nourishment, unquote. I see. Torres stood up, her movement smooth and predatory. And how exactly did we declare war? Your chef Marcus Williams challenged their entire species to what he called a cook-off. Winner takes all territorial rights to this system. Vex-Thul watched in fascination as Torres's demeanor transformed from friendly to absolutely terrifying. Marcus? Oh, those poor, stupid aliens have no idea what they just walked into. Captain, Vex-Thul ventured, surely this can be resolved through diplomatic channels. There's no need for violence over culinary preferences. Torres turned to look at him, and her smile was the kind that made seasoned warriors reconsider their career choices. Commander, you clearly don't understand human psychology. We might fight wars over territory, resources, or ideology. But insult our cooking? She shook her head slowly. That's personal. Within 6 standard hours, the human response had escalated beyond anything in Vex-Thul's experience. They hadn't mobilized their military or activated their improvised weapon systems. Instead, they had done something far more terrifying. They had organized. The entire human population seemed to have collectively decided that the Zenthari had crossed a line that could only be answered with overwhelming culinary force. Restaurants across Earth and its colonies had closed their doors to customers and begun what they called war production. Food scientists worked around the clock developing new recipes. Agricultural stations increased output by 300%. Even their entertainment industry had gotten involved, producing what they called propaganda cooking shows. Commander Culinary reported from the bridge, his voice hollow with disbelief. The humans are moving their entire food service infrastructure into combat positions. What does that even mean? Vex-Thul demanded. They've converted 17 cargo haulers into what they're calling mobile kitchen platforms. Each one is equipped with industrial-scale food preparation equipment and enough ingredients to feed a small army. They're also launching what appears to be the largest catering operation in galactic history. Vex-Thul studied the tactical displays with growing amazement. The humans weren't preparing for war in any conventional sense. They were preparing for the most elaborate dinner party ever conceived, with enough firepower to back up their menu selections. Sir, Culinary continued, they've also issued a formal challenge to the Zenthari leadership. Quote, "Put your money where your mouth is, tentacle face. Best cuisine wins," unquote. And the Zenthari response? They've accepted. Apparently, they consider human confidence to be amusing. Vex-Thul's sensory stalks curled in something approaching admiration. They're going to settle an interstellar conflict through competitive cooking. Yes, sir. The humans have also invited every species in the sector to serve as judges. They're calling it the first annual Galactic Food Festival and Cultural Exchange. With complimentary samples. The commander leaned back in his command pod and tried to wrap his mind around what he was witnessing. In the space of a few hours, the humans had transformed a potential military catastrophe into what appeared to be the galaxy's most elaborate potluck dinner. Culinary, he said finally, what do our cultural analysts make of this behavior? They've given up, sir. The entire xenopsychology department has requested transfer to other duties. Dr. Melvoth submitted his resignation with a note that simply read, I can't even. Vex-Thul nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand why Battle Group 7 had been so thoroughly defeated. It wasn't just that humans were unpredictable. It was that they operated on a completely different set of assumptions about how the universe was supposed to work. Most species saw conflict as a zero-sum game. Territory, resources, survival. The humans seemed to see it as an opportunity for creative problem-solving and social bonding. Commander, Culinary added quietly, they've also invited us to participate as judges. Apparently, Captain Torres mentioned that you were a decent sort for a galactic overlord type and might enjoy the cultural exchange. Vex-Thul considered this. On one hand, his military training told him that fraternizing with potential enemies was a serious breach of protocol. On the other hand, his species hadn't had a decent meal in centuries, and the humans seemed to take their food very seriously indeed. Science officer, he said finally, what do you know about this human concept called hospitality? I'm beginning to suspect it might be their most dangerous weapon, sir. Vex-Thul looked out at the blue-green planet below, where an entire species was preparing to defend their honor through the ancient art of competitive cooking. Somewhere down there, beings who had just redefined interstellar diplomacy were probably arguing about seasoning and presentation techniques. Signal the hegemony command, he ordered. Tell them we're going to need a bigger diplomatic corps.